Would anybody like to be brave and raise their hand?
I want to say something that if JFK would have lived, my brother would have died in Vietnam, as the same with you. Today, looking back over where we've come, so much of both sides are compromised and don't have the courage because of the consequences of the deep state that you've seen dropped on all of them, and your family also. What are your thoughts about Article 5 and Convention of States for the states to try to rectify this, or even things like the Freedom Caucus to try to neuter where a lot of these agencies have gone into dark places? What are your thoughts about how to reform this? Irrespective of, today we have a uniparty, and they all vote the same way, they all vote for war. They don't vote for what the citizens want, and the media goes all along with it. And so the question is, how do you break the pattern, which has been going on so long?
The answer to that question is, to me, what makes me kind of uniquely able to change this system. In fact, when DeSantis came to town about 6 months ago, and he asked me to have breakfast with him at the Bel Air Hotel, and I went over there and I was talking to him about, and I admired some of the way that he had handled the pandemic, because he got the best scientists in the country to come and ask questions and give him a different direction in Florida. And as a result, he did much more in terms of reducing, despite it's an elderly population, did much better in California. And but I said to him, if you get to be in the White House, what will you do with NIH? And he said, I'll burn it to the ground, and which I understand. But I don't. I think I have a better outcome for NIH than that. I know how to unravel the agency capture. And all of these agencies, NIH used to be the gold standard of scientific research, and now it's just an incubator for pharmaceutical products. And I know, I saw how I watched that happen over time. I just watched it, and I know how it happened. And, a lot of it, most of the people who work at NIH are patriotic Americans. They're good public servants, 90% of them. The real problem is that the people who get promoted there and then last forever are people who are in the tank with industry, who are, and they've turned that agency and FDA and CDC into sock puppets for the industry, the pharmaceutical industry is supposed to be regulating. And part of it with those agencies is the economic entanglements, which I will end. So 50% of FDA's budget comes from pharma. NIH has this, weird rule under the Bayh-Dole Act that allows individuals who work. NIH used to do science. It has a $42 billion budget, and it used to do really good science. So the question NIH should be asking is, why are we having this chronic disease epidemic in this country? Why, when I was a kid, 6% of people had chronic disease, and today, by 2006, 54%. And the three categories of diseases: neurological disorders, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes, lupus, and 50 other autoimmune diseases. And then allergic diseases like peanut allergies, food allergies, eczema. All of these began around 1989. So it all exploded that year. In fact, Congress said to EPA, what year did it start? And EPA came back. EPA is a captive agency too, but it's captive by the oil and coal and pesticide industries, not by pharma. So they actually came back and gave up real science. And they said, it's a red line. It happened in 1989. Something happened in 1989. We know it's an environmental exposure because genes don't cause epidemics. Oh, and there's only about, Phil Landrigan has done this study. There's only about 11 things that fit that timeline. There's, glyphosate, neonicotinoid pesticides, PFOAs, PFASs, flame retardants that were in your kids' pajamas and, are in all the furniture in your house, are, enormously teratogenic, mutagenic, carcinogenic. Cell phones and Wi-Fi radiation, ultrasound, and then the vaccine schedule exploded that year. And we went from having 3 vaccines when I was a kid to 72 vaccines today, with the big explosion happening in 89. And so, it's a very simple science, very easy to do, to go and look and figure out which one it is and then end it. The problem is every one of those has a big shot at the other end. And they don't want, NIH won't let anybody do those studies. So instead, it develops, it's changed its function. So now what it does is it develops drugs to treat chronic disease, and it develops at NIH, keeps half the patent, and then sends it to the universities to do phase 1 and phase 2 trials. They get to keep part of the patent. Then they transfer that to a pharma company, which does the phase 3 trial and then does the marketing, and they all then share royalties. And if you are at NIH and you were one of the officials who rubber stamped that product, you personally can get royalties $150,000 a year forever from that product. So there's 6 men at NIH who are collecting $150,000 a year from the Moderna vaccine. They're supposed to be regulating it. They're paying for their boat, their mortgage, their kids' education. And if anything bad is found out about that vaccine, they're not going to get that money. So they're the ones who are supposed to be looking for bad things and protecting us from them, but they have blinders on. And then the agency is getting tens of billions from that product. And so these conflicts are built in that are like, have given them agency capture on steroids. I spent 40 years suing EPA, which is a captive agency. When we sued Monsanto, we went through we found these emails that showed that the head of the pesticide division for a decade, Jess Rowland, was secretly working for Monsanto the whole time, killing studies on glyphosate. And, at one point, one of his emails said, if I kill this study, you guys, Monsanto, you're going to need to give me a gold medal. Oh, he was not working for the public interest. And this is true throughout the agency, all of them. But if EPA was getting 50% of its budget from the coal industry and was dependent on that budget for, coal industry sales that year, I don't know what would happen, but that's the way it is with these public health agencies. So I know the individuals in many of these agencies that are, the crooks. I know how to change the incentive system so that, we get the money out and we get the, incentives out to that are, and the revolving doors and make it so that you can't go to work for the industry you regulate in 1 year, you have to wait 5 years. There's a lot of things you can do. With the CIA, which is really what you're talking about, it is a captive agency too, but it's captive by the military-industrial complex. And its job is to just provide constant wars, by giving us these kind of comic book characterizations of, of world events. This is the bad guy, this is the good guy, and, and we're going to go spend $113 billion on it. And that agency, my father had a plan for reorganize that agency, and I would do the same thing, which is you break up the espionage division from the plans division, which is the clandestine agency. My daughter-in-law, who is helping to run this campaign, she and Dennis Kucinich, her name's Anna Rose Fox, she's married to my son, but she was a CIA spy for most of her career. She was in the clandestine agency, clandestine division, working in weapons of mass destruction. She was a spy in the Mideast and in China. And what she said, and she is, one of the CIA's biggest critics today, but she says, most of the people there's 22,000 employees and 20,000 of them are really great patriots and public servants. And but there's an incentive system there where the espionage division its function is to justify and feed the clandestine division, which does fixing elections, assassinating leaders, bribing union officials, extraordinary renditions, and all this, monkey business. My grandfather sat on a commission in 1955, Joseph Kennedy, that looked at the CIA for the first time, and he recommended abolishing it. He said, it is the worst, it is hurting America's national security. And I think the same is true today. They are so damaging. I mean, if they look at what happened in Iran, they overthrew. They have a statue of Kermit Roosevelt, and because he overthrew, he masterminded the plan to overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, and they think that's a success story, and it's not a success story. Yeah, they got rid of him and they put in the Shah, but we are still living with the blowback from that. Iran should not be an enemy of the United States. The Iranian people are probably more like Americans than anybody in the Mideast, except for Israel. And they have the same aspirations and values, and it's crazy that we're enemies, but it's because of that incident. So we're living with this blowback. They consider the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. That was a success. Look what happened. We spent $8 trillion on that project. Since with that, and then, the wars that necessarily followed, Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Syria, we killed more Iraqis than Saddam ever did. That country is an incoherent mess right now. It's just a battle between Shia and Sunni despots. We pushed it into becoming a proxy of Iran, which is the exact outcome that we've been trying to prevent for 40 years as a key of our foreign policy. We created ISIS. We sent 2 million refugees up into Europe and destabilized democracy all over Europe, caused Brexit. That was what happened from overthrowing. That's what we got for $8 trillion. And, then we spent $16 trillion on the lockdown. So that's $24 trillion we spent and got nothing for it. And, is it any wonder we don't have a middle class left in this country? But if you ask the CIA, was that a success? They'll say, yeah. And so there's no accountability. And that's because the espionage division is working for the plans division, and I would break them up.
That was an amazing question. Thank you for all of that. Would you like to ask a question?
I would love to.
I know you. Eric's going to give you, this to be recorded. The mic.
Donahue.
Oh, Donahue.
Hi, Kathy. Sorry. Thank you so much for your courage. I have a name too. I'm Barbara Allen. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Bobby just got for me. Okay, I'll handle it. I fell in love with you when not in the same way.
No, of course.
I heard you actually on Alec Baldwin's Instagram. So thank you for that. I've been teaching kids for 25 years. And one thing that I've been seeing in the last 3 is that teens have lost their faith in our system. I have friends that are in their 20s, and they have been advising me on this new show that I'm writing about the Messiah. And all that I keep hearing with people younger than me is that they've lost their faith. They've lost their faith in religion. They've lost their faith in politics. I know that because I watched your beautiful address when you started this campaign, that you believe that democracy is still alive. What do we say to the young people today to move the needle? How can what's their assignment? What's their homework? Because they get it deep down because they're not fully jaded yet, but there must be a purpose for them. So what do the youngest voters have to do right now that we could literally change everything? Because I believe it, because I believe in God. And I know you do too. I want to know what the assignment is.
It's a difficult question. I mean, the way to restore trust in this country in every generation is to start acting in a way that's trustworthy. And, not just to tell people start trusting the system because the system is untrustworthy. They're right to be cynical. They're right to be nihilists. Because this system is, that's where we are. It's a bunch of self-interested technocrats who are, and powerful people who are pillaging our democracy, and it's broken. And we need to restore it. And the only thing I'd say right now is, they should join the battle to win it back, and become part of it. But I don't think you can tell people just start having trust or having faith or believing in something because everything we're being told is lies. The government's job has just become to be a liar. And it wasn't that way. I mean, when I was a kid, everybody believed the American government never lied. And really, the first evidence that shocked Americans is when, during the Eisenhower, in May of 1960, when the U-2 crashed in Russia, and Eisenhower at Allen Dulles, it was a CIA project, and Allen Dulles talked Eisenhower into doing his speech denying the whole program existed. And what they didn't know is that the pilot, Gary Francis Powers, had not taken his suicide shot, which he was supposed to do. And the Russians captured him and they held him for a while to let us, lie about it. And then they produced him. And Eisenhower had to admit he was lying. And it was the first time in our history that Americans said, oh my God, our government actually lies to us. And then in 1971, the Pentagon Papers came out, which was just, it was 27 volumes, tens of thousands of papers of lie after lie after lie. And Americans started losing faith, really wholesale in the government. Today, when my uncle was president, 80% of Americans trusted the government. Today, 22%. And they're foolish people. Because the government is untrustworthy. And so you can't tell a kid, trust your government, because that's, a recipe for more, disappointment and disillusionment. But what I would say to my kids is, choose something that you believe in and let it consume your life. I was raised in a family where we were raised believing that, that our lives would be consumed by some great controversy, and it would be a huge privilege to us if we were able to take an effective role in it. And that's really all you can hope for in life is to be effective and useful in some great venture, some daring venture. That's the only thing we can say, and I know it's not very useful.
Oh, it is. This person right here, first of all, since I'm pointing to you, I just want to thank Lolly Seidenfeld because she helped organize this entire just pointing over here. So her husband, Rabbi Shlomo Seidenfeld, said to me one time something that changed my life forever 20 years ago, which is that the opposite of depression might not be happiness, it might be purpose. And that changed my whole life. And I think that's really what you're saying is that, feeling a sense of being needed. And that's like what you were talking about with you wake up every day and you just know that you're needed and you go to work and that is your satisfaction is being needed. And I think people don't know that they're needed, right? It's not just that you're loved, it's that you're needed. And we need you on this mission.
Yeah.
And all of you. And by the way, I just want to say in case anybody sneaks out before you leave that if you go to Kennedy24.com, you can make a donation to this campaign. And I really hope that you will. I really hope that you will. And more than making a donation, because the truth is, there's not that much you can donate on that website. But if you want to get involved in bigger donations, you can talk to me. I can tell you how to do that. But more than making a donation is opening your heart and sharing this, because the world likes to smear people and just call people names like, oh, he's an anti-vax, as if that's the totality of who he is or anything about what he has to say, because let's face it, without the Joker, Batman's not Batman, and he's Batman. He's Batman. And the whole world right now is the Joker. And so if you feel like you not like you have to like trust me or some, but if you really felt it tonight, like you feel something in your soul, just tell you like you got the download, share that with 5 people, right? And if you want to host an event like this or something like that, let me know, because you guys, we're moving into the White House, you guys. That's okay. And how funny if Larry David winds up being responsible for you winding up in the White House. He is today. It is a Curb episode. It's like
It is
the
a Curb
best
episode.
ever.
Yes.
Who else has
Yeah.
a question? Raise your hands. Nathan, first of all, thank you for serving our country. This man is in the Air Force. Army, helicopter pilot, was in Afghanistan. How long were you in Afghanistan for? Just 9 months of your life. Tell us things. Tell us a question.
So I was originally going to ask you about your family's legacy with civil rights and education being the #1 civil rights act right now for like people who have access to it.
Right.
Then you said something about government being the problem, and then government size has increased with more and more control in people's lives. So then I switched my question to, what is your plan for reducing the size of government and the impact that it can have if people become corrupt? Because government is smaller, it's corruption. It can't have the same impact.
The areas that I'm going to focus on is winding down the warfare state, and turning our country into what we were supposed to be. As I said, we spent $8 trillion on Iraq and its aftermath. We're now spending $113 billion in Ukraine on a war that is, we were told was a humanitarian exercise. My son went over there, joined the Foreign Legion, fought in the war in the Kharkiv offensive as a machine gunner in a special forces unit, and we were all applauding for the Ukrainian people, and horrified by the illegal invasion by Putin. But then it begins to emerge that every decision we make is designed to prolong that war, and not to wind it down. And then Biden admits that our purpose there is regime change for Vladimir Putin, which is what the neocons have been looking for 2 decades. And his Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in April 2022 that our purpose there is to exhaust the Russian army and degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. So now it turns out it's not a humanitarian war, it's a war of attrition to exhaust Russia. And poor little Ukraine is stuck as a proxy war between 2 great powers that are using the bodies of Ukrainian kids as a geopolitical tool and geopolitical machinations. And we've killed now, by the best estimates, 350,000 Ukrainian kids. And there's the 60,000 that are there now, that are fighting on the front lines today. It's highly likely they will be lost in the next few months, and the Ukrainian army is going to collapse. And Ukraine didn't want to do that. Zelensky, who's an actor and a comedian,
Vince Turgeon.
How did he run for president? He had no political experience because he ran on a peace platform. He ran saying he's going to sign the Minsk Accords, which the Russians had agreed to, and where NATO doesn't join, if the Russian population in Donbass is protected, it becomes an autonomous region within Ukraine. They had voted to join Russia. Russia said, we don't want them. You keep them in Ukraine, but make sure they can speak their own language and they're not being killed. And Zelensky ran on that basis, and then the neocons got around him, and he changed and went full blast of war. And now we've put 113 billion in, which is just a money laundering scheme for U.S. Military contractors who are making all the money. And there are 2 Ukrainians said to me last night, we are cannon fodder for Lockheed Martin, and that's what we're doing. Oh, and my uncle, his vision was that we end the warfare state. And that is the biggest expenditure of government today. We're spending $1.1 trillion of our annual budget on defense and national security, which is part of defense. If we weren't stirring up all this trouble, we wouldn't need the x-rays at the airport. We could go back to, before we were doing all that. My uncle kept people, he said what he wanted the vision that children and people in Africa and Latin America and Asia have of America should not be a man in uniform with a gun. It should be a Peace Corps volunteer. And he started the Kennedy Milk Program, which provided nutrition to hundreds of thousands of malnourished kids around the world. He started the Alliance for Progress and USAID to build middle classes, to end run the dictators and build up middle classes, which are the fundamental, bedrock of democracy in all of these poor countries. And because of that, because he avoided war, and because people knew what his intention was, they loved our country. And there are more statues to John Kennedy, more boulevards named after him, more avenues and streets, and more universities and colleges in foreign countries, and particularly in developing countries, than any other president of the United States. And that was a huge national security issue. Now, what we should be doing, what my grandfather said, is that we should arm ourselves to the teeth at home around our borders, but then invest in our economy and growing our middle class, because the real strength of a nation comes from having a robust middle class and a strong, powerful economy. That's the real strength. And that's what we should be doing. I will, when I'm elected, I'm going to close. There's 800 bases we have now around the country, and I'm going to close those bases. I'm going to stop building a stealth bomber. Each one costs $1 billion, and they can't fly in the rain. Wouldn't it be better to spend that money building schools in our country, not inner cities?
Yes.
In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we were told we were going to get a peace dividend and we were going to be able to spend it on education. And that our military budget was going to go from $6 billion a year to $2 billion. And instead, it went to 1.1 billion. I mean, 1.1 trillion. And so, I want to restore the peace dividend. Now, China has done this. What China does not project military power abroad. Our whole philosophy is we project military power, we can dominate the world. China projects economic power. It goes into African, Latin American countries and it builds them roads, no strings attached. It builds them hospitals. It builds them schools. And China now is eating our lunch. China is, Brazil has switched to the Chinese currency. Saudi Arabia switched to Chinese currency. Argentina, all of these countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan are going there. So, we are losing the dominant currency, which is costing, it will cost us $750 billion a year minimum. And the entire U.S. military strategy was called the Shia Crescent. It was Saudi Arabia was the keystone, and then Oman, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, the Arab Emirates, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. A Shia Crescent that we would arm to the teeth to contain Iran. Well, last month, Saudi Arabia, China brokered a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So our entire U.S. empire collapsed, and the papers never covered it, but it is the end. It's over. Mohammed bin Salman, a week later, explained himself by dropping oil production at a time when America is having spiraling inflation. Saudi Arabia has never done that before. It was like one of these things does. And 3 days later, he made it explicit and said, we don't care what America thinks anymore. I gave this analogy. I was on this podcast called the All In Podcast. And I said, we're like the alcoholic who is behind on his mortgage. And he takes the milk money and he's in the local bar buying rounds for strangers and thinking he's making permanent friends. And, that's what we were doing. We were spending $1 trillion a year making friends, who don't like us. And what we should be doing is what my uncle wanted to do, which what he did, which is project our military power. We project project our economic power rather than military power, build ourselves at home, make us too expensive to conquer, and then build a very, very strong economic generator. That shrinks the military. We need to shrink the medical industrial complex. And the way that you do that is by ending the chronic disease epidemic. We're spending, we spend $4.3 trillion on healthcare every year, where I think we're 79th in terms of outcome, worse than Cuba or Costa Rica. And 80% of that goes to treating chronic disease. Oh, it's a huge bonanza for the pharmaceutical industry because it's buying albuterol and EpiPens, $600 EpiPens, diabetes medicine for millions of Americans because we're the sickest country in the world. Nobody else has chronic disease like this. We have it worse than any nation on earth. And what I've said to people, I know how to end it. And I will, if I haven't dramatically reduced the amount of chronic disease in children by my third year in office or fourth year in office, you should not vote for me the next term. Because that's what I'm running on, that I'm going to be able to do that. That will be shrinking government and shrinking, medical care. And then, the other place that I'm going to shrink government is in energy. But, and that's a long story.
Just to be respectful of your time and also of his time, because he's been speaking and he was in San Francisco this morning. It's a long story. We're going to take 2 more questions. Chris, you want to stand up? And Stu, you want to give him a mic so we can record his question?
Thank you. My name is Chris Pearson Smith. I'm a native of California, longtime friend of Kathy. Thank you both for being here so much. I'm really nervous and emotional just because I wanted to thank you. You are literally an embodiment of principles that my dad stood for, and he just passed away on Thursday. And, thank you. And I know that he's instilled those kinds of principles in me and my family, and principles of truth and justice and the belief that this country is the greatest place on earth. And
That's
I
right.
really believe that. I just wanted to clarify, because Kathy asked you about your vision. It seems like a lot of what you have in mind for our country is cleaning up the mess that's happened for generations, or at least one generation. How long do you think this is going to take? And in getting back to what Cheryl said, like making people feel like they're not left behind, what would you say your top priority is to start with? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, my top priority is going to be de-escalating conflict, settling the Ukraine war, if it's still going on very quickly, and, assuming that we haven't, had a nuclear exchange by then and destroyed the planet, destroy the world, de-escalating that war, de-escalating our conflict with China. China is a huge threat to us. But it does not want to confront us militarily. It wants to confront us and bury us economically, and it's doing it. And I don't have any fear or any trepidation about going head to head with China on the economic playing field. That's what we ought to be doing. We ought to be de-escalating the military and letting them know that's not an option for us. We'll fight you we'll fight you with our entrepreneurship, with America's industrial genius, what FDR called, and we're not going to go the military route and let them settle their differences with Taiwan, not under that pressure. They don't want to go to war with Taiwan, and that would be one of the bloodiest wars in history. And they're their own people. They don't want to have that kind of a civil war. So unless we push them to do it, they're not going to do that. And we need to be de-escalating around the globe. We need to be announcing our intentions. We're out of the war business. We're going into business.
Albert, you have a question? You want to take that little mic too?
My name is Albert Najat. Some of you know I wasn't born in the United States, and I came here 43 years ago from Iran. And I do see the country going in the wrong direction, and I like everything that you've said so far. De-escalation and basically restructuring of the NIH and all of that. However, over the last couple of weeks, what I hear on the news was that the DNC is not going to have primaries, we're not going to have debates. How are you going to bypass this? How are you going to continue if this is actually the truth?
And it's a good question. I feel like we are going to win the primaries. I feel like, and we already are developing a presence in every state. We'll have organizations in every state. I'm going to fight very hard in the initial 5 states, which is South Carolina, New Hampshire, Georgia, Iowa, and Nevada. But I think what is going to, you never know what's going to happen in the future. And I don't make predictions, but I can tell you strategically what could happen is that my polling is already very good. Oh, I started out at 14, and I went, all 3 major polls had me an average of 20. The Rasmussen poll last week had me tied, statistically tied with the president in a general election with President Biden, which is an election that won't happen. But all these polls are polling registered Democrats that are likely to vote in the Democratic primary, and some of them are people who voted in the last primary for Biden, and so but we're looking. Our in-house polls are looking at the whole population and people who are likely to vote, including many people who are Republicans and many independents. And I think that I will surprise the party with strength. But here's the other thing, is that our in-house polls are showing that in head-to-head contests right now, and this is the polling from 3 nights ago, that Biden is tied with both DeSantis and Trump. I'm not allowed to use the word in my house. That he's actually dead even with DeSantis, I think 44-44, and he is 3 points ahead of Trump in my poll. Other polls are showing him behind. Our poll, which our pollsters saw him in, we think he's the best. So, and he's showing him 3 points ahead, but that's a statistical tie because the poll is a margin of error of 3 points. But those same polls show me beating Trump by 8 points and beating DeSantis by 11 points. And I think what will happen is that some of the public, we don't release those polls, but some of the public polling groups that, publish their polls are, at some point, they will do that poll. And then I think many Democrats will see that the president has very little chance or a very high chance of not beating Trump. And that I have a much better chance of beating Trump. And also, if you were Trump, who would you rather debate, me or President Biden? And I'm not saying that because, I'm such a great debater, but on the issues that, that I can hold him responsible for. I can hold him responsible for the lockdown, which was his lockdown. That lockdown cost our country $16 trillion. He knew it was wrong, and yet he let his bureaucrats roll him. That's weakness. And I can confront him on that. That lockdown shifted $4 trillion from the middle class in this country to the super rich, to people he hangs out with, right? That he likes to associate with. We created $1 billion a day during the lockdown, $1 billionaire a day. We created 500 new billionaires in this lockdown. And the Oxfam report just came out and showed that the people who had $1 billion when they entered the lockdown increased their wealth on average by 30%. Oh, this was a gift to the super rich. And, and it was an attack on the poor. Blacks were dying at 3.6 times the rate of whites in this country. Suicide is now the leading cause of death in black children. I mean, it was crazy what they were doing. They came out here to Malibu and they were arresting surfers for being out on the water in the sunshine with the vitamin D and telling them, go lock yourself at home and charging them $1,000. They went to every basketball court and padlocked it in Compton and Englewood. And if they couldn't padlock the court, they removed the rims. So the people who, literally had to go lock themselves in home and watch the TV and gain 29 pounds on average. Children in this country, toddlers, according to a Brown University study, lost 22 IQ points. The kids, a third of children will need remedial education all the way through high school, and they'll never recover. This was just an all-out assault and battery on our children, and he's responsible. President Biden can't confront him with that because he continued those policies. Oh, if you're Donald Trump, would you rather debate me on that or him? And I think a lot of people will come to the conclusion that he'd be worse off debating me.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
It's in the same vein as your question, because it is shocking that the DNC has said there aren't going to be any debates. But so they can say we're not going to have Democratic debates, but could they say when it comes down to two candidates, a Republican and a Democrat, can they say there won't be debates with those
They
two?
can say it, but, I think people would be really angry. I mean, we're supposed to be the model democracy for the world. And if the parties are essentially picking, I mean, what they're doing with me is they're saying it's like the Soviet Union did, the party picked the candidate. And, it used to be that we actually had democracy. We had the people picking the candidates, and, they'd had to go and campaign and do town halls and do debates with each other and do retail politics. Now, the last election, President Biden ran from his basement and because it was during the pandemic, and then just carpet bombed the country with $1 billion in advertising. And that's, so what does that say about our country? You have got all these people who no longer believe that our election system works, who believe it's rigged, that everything's rigged. And for the Democratic Party to, should be saying at this time in history, no, we are the model for democracy. It works. We believe in it. We have faith in it. And instead they're saying, it is rigged. And we're no longer the party of the New Deal. We're the party of the rigged deal. And we got our guy and we're going to choose him. And what the people think is irrelevant. And I think that's bad. But also, he's going to have to debate Trump. And Trump is like, the best debater in American history, but just on his record on that.
Sorry, I'm
It's like
making faces next to you
Yeah.
because that sounds gross.
Yeah.
Why would you even say
Well,
that? Just
because
because he
he-
can bully people on the stage
Because
and walk around?
he dispatched 16 people in a row.
That was crazy.
Like,
Is that good, or is that just somebody?
I'm
being
not
a
saying
bully?
he's a wonderful person. I'm just saying that he was an effective debator.
Okay.
Statistically,
It is what our arguments are all the
Yeah,
time.
this is welcome to our world.
But I mean, asking President Biden, President Trump is probably going to debate his opponents, and now I think Chris Christie's getting in tomorrow, and a bunch of
DeSantis.
other people tomorrow. Oh, there's going to be another group that he may debate, he may not, but he's likely to debate him, and he's going to be in prime condition at the time that the general election, and not debating in the Democratic primary. It's like asking a prize fighter to kind of to sit on the couch and eat Chick-fil-A in preparation for the big prize fight. So I don't think it makes any sense, but we'll see what happens.
So I just wanted to say before we wrap up, there's something in the Talmud that says that before you're even born, it's predetermined like what events you're going to be at, like what weddings you'll be at, what sweet 16s you'll be at. It was a deal made in heaven that you would particularly be sitting in this room. And so you really matter, and it really counts that you were here. And you braved LA traffic and all the things you had to do. Really and truly, like, it means the world that you took the time to come here. And I really feel like what happened tonight wasn't just a conversation. It was like, this person is just a walking open heart. And I feel like words from the heart just enter the heart. Raise your hand if you feel like the words entered your heart tonight. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do is something you've wanted to do your whole life, which is to have the courage to be totally yourself. And so, yes, you should go to Kennedy24.com and donate, but even more, like for yourself and for your children and their children, you should post that you were here tonight. And you should have the courage to set down what people think of you. Because here's the deal, you guys. People don't even see you. They see what they're willing to see. They only see their projection. That's all people are doing all the time is projecting. So you get to decide that you're going to just come clean and come out and be yourself. Okay? And that is probably the greatest gift that you give to the American people, because there are so many people like us who were so afraid to talk about those basketball courts being closed. There were so many people who were so terrified to actually just have an opinion about their kids getting the vax or whatever they feel about Ukraine. People are afraid. But if you post and you just be yourself, you're going to give 10 of your friends courage that you can give them because of that move. That's a pretty powerful thing to do. You guys with me? So, I don't know exactly when Bobby's going to leave, but I mean, take selfies, be here, be present. You were here tonight. And I just want to say, you know, Cheryl had foot surgery like 10 minutes ago, and she's here. Woo! And would you like to say something?
Can we also ask they please include hashtag Kennedy24?
Hashtag Kennedy24. And I just want to say, I feel like I'm 43 years old, and if my grandparents, if they were ever proud of me, I feel like tonight is the night that they're
Thank you so much.
Kathy, thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.